I'm here, Michelle, if you're looking for me.
No, not looking for you yet.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll go off then till you're looking for me. Okay, Michelle, see
Okay,
you
no
guys later.
problem. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to your September session. Morning, Hein.
My speaker is on. Morning, Michelle. Hi there.
Again, many thanks from all of us at Leapfrog for doing this training for us every month. Really do appreciate
Absolute
your
pleasure,
input,
Michelle.
and
It's
I look
lucky to
forward to
meet
the
up.
knowledge you're going to impart to us today, Hein.
Well, Ian, it's such a beautiful day. We can talk about the weather maybe if we wanted to, but yeah, it's lovely in Cape Town, and thank you all for joining us again. We really appreciate it. We know that it's time out of your lives and your busy schedules. So thank you for sitting in and listening to us. We're going to have a look today at the 72-hour clauses in offer to purchases, just to understand it maybe a little bit better, um, because they can be very tricky. As you all know, most contracts these days offer to purchases in respect to buying and selling properties have got a 72-hour clause in them. So by inserting that continued marketing clause in the offer to purchase, in that property sale agreement and signing it, the seller and the purchaser therefore indicate that they have agreed, they are in agreement that the seller may, after the signature of this offer to purchase, the seller may continue to market his property and accept any other bona fide unconditional offers until such time, obviously, as the first purchaser has secured or has complied with the suspensive conditions in that first offer to purchase. So, just for interest's sake, obviously these clauses exist in most offer to purchases, especially where there are suspensive conditions that the purchaser must still fulfill. And you need to have a look. The importance of today's session is just to realize the importance of the wording in these clauses, because the clauses are not all exactly the same. So your 72-hour clause will vary, or it might, but it probably will differ from the 72-hour clause on a Pam Golding or Remax or whatever. So those clauses vary one from the next. So it is so important to read those clauses and to make sure that you understand how do you go about to enforce the 72-hour clause if I'm getting maybe a second purchase, a cash offer, it's not subject to a bond anymore. How do I put the first purchaser to terms to enforce the 72-hour clause against him? So that's the importance of today's little talk about the wording of the 72-hour clauses, because they do vary from one to the next. For the 72-hour clause, obviously, the 72 hours or 3 days, it's in practice, it has become practice that we will give a purchaser 3 days or 72 hours to compete with an unconditional offer. Those time periods can vary. I've seen clauses that says it will be 90 hours or whatever. It will be 4 days, 5 days. It won't be 3 days. So it's important to read the clause and ensure that you know how much time do you need to give the first purchaser, because it might not be 72 hours. It might be more than 72 hours. So it's important to have a look at that. And I've had scenarios where the offer to purchase has got the 72-hour clause in it, absolutely, the normal 72-hour clause, but it had a condition, a special condition or a term of the agreement said, for example, that the seller will only be entitled to impose the 72-hour clause within 8 days after signature of the offer to purchase. Why? What was the scenario there? That purchaser came, he made an offer on the property, it was subject to a bond. So obviously, the 72-hour clause can be enforced against him until such time as he got his bond approved. He was sitting overseas, I think, at that time. But he was traveling back to South Africa. So he made the offer to the seller to say, Mr. Seller, here, I'm giving you the full asking price. It's subject to me getting a bond, a 100% bond. I know that the 72-hour clause is in there, but you know what? I don't want to lose this property. So please just give me an opportunity to come back to South Africa. I've got all the documents. Let me just go and discuss it with my mortgage originator. I can get my bond approved within 2 or 3 days after I'm back in South Africa. So I'm offering you this, but please don't enforce the 72-hour clause against me for the first 10 days after we sign this offer to purchase, because I know I'm going to get my, and the seller was happy with it. Look, the seller didn't have to accept that. He could have said no, but then he might have run the risk of losing the purchase. The purchaser might have said, well, no, I'm not traveling back to South Africa. I want this property. I'm not paying all the cost of traveling. I know I'm going to get the bond. I'm not going to pay the cost to travel back to South Africa to meet with my mortgage originator within 5 days, get my bond approved within 2 days thereafter. So within the next 7 days after we sign this offer, I know that I will have my bond in place. So that's what I'm asking you, Mr. Seller. Please don't enforce the 72-hour clause within 10 days of us signing this offer to purchase. After 10 days, go for it. Absolutely. I've got no problem with that. But just allow me the opportunity to come back to South Africa. I don't want to pay all those costs, flights, etc., accommodation, and then within 2 days after me signing the offer, you get another offer, whatever, and then I wasted money. So the point is, have a look at the wording of the 72-hour clause so that we know when we can put a purchaser to terms, when we can't put him to terms, and you can obviously amend and structure your contract based on the negotiations between the seller and the purchaser, because obviously each and every purchaser in respect to that contract have got different needs and requirements, so it might vary. So in that scenario, for example, where the 72-hour clause could only be enforced within 10 days after the signing of the offer to purchase, the seller was happy with that, and in that specific scenario, the purchaser did fly to South Africa. He applied for his bond, and I think within 1 day he had his bond approval. So everybody was happy, and the deal went ahead, and the transfer registered, and everybody was happy. So, but you can word it obviously in specific scenarios, but that's the whole point. Have a look how that 72-hour clause was worded in order to know whether you, with your purchaser, can put that first purchaser to terms, or does any other purchaser out there need to do to put your purchaser, the first purchaser, to terms? And are they complying with the conditions of the 72-hour clause in your contract? Because if they don't comply with the terms of your agreement, they can't put your purchaser to terms in terms of the 72-hour clause. I'm just trying to think now with regards to other contracts and agreements that I've seen. I've also seen, for example, where an offer to purchase is subject to the purchaser getting a mortgage bond or selling a property. Then the 72-hour clause may only apply to the selling of the property. So while the guy is still busy selling his property, despite the fact that he's still busy trying to get a bond as well, the 72-hour clause only applies to the sale of his property. So until such time as he hasn't sold his property, the first purchaser can be put to 72-hour terms, to the 72-hour clause. So it all depends on the wording of the agreement. So what is the purpose? Sorry, man, I don't know why it's skipping ahead. I don't know whether it's on automatic. Here we go. Maybe Michelle wants me to rush through it and not talk so much. But no, I'm just joking, Michelle. So what is the purpose of a continued marketing clause, and how does it work? So obviously, such clauses often apply in instances or circumstances where the agreement between the seller and the purchaser is subject to suspensive conditions. Well, in actual fact, the 72-hour clause can only apply in terms of contracts where there are suspensive conditions that must still be fulfilled. So, until such time as your purchaser has complied with the suspensive conditions, whether he must get a bond by the 30th of September and he hasn't gotten his bond yet, whether he must sell a property until the 30th of November and he hasn't sold his property yet, in that scenario, the purchaser must just understand that the seller can't just sit here and wait for you, Mr. Purchaser, to get your bond by the 30th of September or sell a property by the 30th of November. It's unfair for the seller to take his property off the market, to sit here and wait and hope and pray that your bond is approved or that you sell your property. And he doesn't know how proactive you are in getting your bond approved. He doesn't know how proactive you are in trying to sell your property. Have you put it on the market yet? Are the agents involved with the sale of the property? We don't know what you're doing. So we can't now let the seller sit here and wait in anticipation for you to fulfill those suspensive conditions. We don't know how proactive you are. So we just want to make it clear, Mr. Purchaser, in the contract that there's a 72-hour clause. So if the seller receives a bona fide, unconditional offer, it's not subject to any suspensive conditions anymore because it could be a cash offer, because the second purchaser could have had his bond approved in full. So now it's no more a suspensive contract. So now we can put the first purchaser to term. So purchasers might think, this is unfair. You can continue to sell your property. Well, you can continue to market it. And if you get your suspensive conditions fulfilled, Mr. Purchaser, then it's done. But if you sit there and do nothing, we can't do, it's to the detriment of the seller here. He's just trying to sell his property. And he must be able to accept the best unconditional offer that comes across his desk. And if he gets another unconditional offer, he must have the right to give you notice, to say, right, Mr. Purchaser, you've now got 3 days. Come to the party. Come. And if you really want the property, then make a plan to purchase this property. So be active, Mr. First Purchaser, to get your property sold or get your bond approved. So the clause is therefore intended. The only reason for this clause is to protect your seller, that he doesn't take his property off the market until such time as the first purchaser got a bond approved or got his property sold. It's unfair for the seller to just take his property off the market and hope that the purchaser gets his suspensive conditions fulfilled. That's not very fair. So that's the reason for the clause. So if we have a look, I'm sure I'll be able to skip it just now, guys. Let me try this way. There we go. So if we have a look at a typical continued marketing clause in most agreements, and in fact, I've got a leapfrog offer to purchase here. It's from Cape Town, obviously, but I'm rather going to read you this clause, the leapfrog one. So the continued marketing clause in this leapfrog contract says that prior to the fulfillment of the suspensive conditions contained in 10.1 and 10.2, which relates to the bond approval or the sale of a property, the seller retains the right, and the seller retains the right to continue to market the property, which is the subject of this agreement. And in the event of the seller receiving a satisfactory written offer free of any suspensive conditions from a third party, the seller shall notify the purchaser in writing. In writing furnish the purchaser with a copy of such an offer and giving the purchaser 72-hour notice to waive or prove fulfillment of the suspensive condition. And if the purchaser fails to give the seller written notice of the waiver or the fulfillment of his suspensive conditions within the 72-hour period, then the seller will be entitled to cancel the agreement forthwith. So in your clause, just for interest's sake, so let's say, for example, you've got an offer, Leapfrog offer to purchase from a purchaser to a seller, and your offer to purchase on your Leapfrog agreement is subject, for example, to the purchaser getting a mortgage bond by the 30th of September. Right. Now, Remax, Pan Golding, Southern, whoever, as a second purchaser that's interested, it's a cash offer. Cash offer. So they want now to put your purchaser to terms in terms of the 72-hour notice to say, Mr. Purchaser, I'm a first purchaser. We've got a cash offer. We hereby give you 72-hour notice to either waive your suspensive condition so that your offer to purchase is no longer subject to you to get a mortgage bond by the 30th of September. So you were lucky enough, therefore, that mom or dad or a brother or an uncle gave you the money and said, okay, we'll lend you the money. Or you must get your bond approved within the 3 days. Either or. Either give us the cash, Mr. First Purchaser, or get your bond approved within 3 days. If you can do that, then yes, that offer to purchase will then proceed. But it's just important to note that in terms of your offer, in terms of your 72-hour clause, because your purchaser, in terms of the Leapfrog contract, must be given notice in terms of your 72-hour clause. So your 72-hour clause says, and that is why the wording is so important. It says here, the seller shall notify the purchaser in writing. Okay, yes, it can be done by email, first purchaser. You know what? I've got another offer to purchase. I give you 72-hour notice now. So it must be in writing. Okay, great. Furnishing the purchaser with a copy of such written offer. So in terms of your 72-hour clause, it's not good enough just to write an email to the purchaser and say, Mr. Purchaser, we've got a cash offer here. We now give you 72-hour notice to fulfill your condition or come up with a cash. That's not good enough. The agreement says you must also furnish the purchaser with a copy of that second offer. So in that 72-hour notice email that you sent to the first purchaser, you must also attach a copy of the offer to purchase, because that is what the 72-hour clause says. You must furnish the purchaser with a copy of that written offer. So if that isn't done, your purchaser wasn't put on 72-hour notice, because Remax, Van Golding, Sotheby's, Chas Everett, that wanted to put your purchaser to terms didn't comply with the wording of the 72-hour clause that is applicable to your purchaser, the Leapfrog purchaser. So if they gave him notice, we've got a cash offer, you've got 72-hour notice, and that's it. And after 72 hours, they write a letter to him to say, hey, Mr. Purchaser, you didn't come back to us within the 72-hour notice with regards to the fact whether you are going to waive that condition, whether mom or dad gave you the cash money, or whether you got your bond approved within those 3 days. You didn't come back to us. So now we're going to cancel that first offer, and the seller will proceed with a second cash offer. Your purchaser can turn around to say, oh, hang on, guys. No. That 72-hour notice didn't start to run. I didn't get proper notice in terms of the 72-hour clause. Where is the copy of the offer to purchase of that second offer? That cash offer that you are alleging, where is a copy of that? Because the 72-hour clause says you must give me a copy of that offer. And then you'll see the other agents running around and sending another 72-hour notice to your purchaser with the written OTP attached thereto, because then the 72-hour notice will only start to run once they've provided him with the written copy of that other offer to purchase. So then your first purchaser, will then have 3 days from there to comply with the terms and conditions. So he pretty much had 6 days to comply or to get his bond approved because he wasn't properly put to terms or given 72-hour notice the first time around. So now they're getting a second bite at the cherry and provide him with a copy of the offer to purchase. So the whole point of this talk, as I said right at the beginning, is to make sure, have a look at the wording of the 72-hour clause because you need to comply with each and every little term of that clause. Otherwise, the purchaser won't be put to terms properly in terms of the 72-hour clause. Sometimes the 72-hour clause would say you must also provide proof that that second purchaser is now unconditional. So, for example, if that second offer to purchase was subject to that purchaser getting a bond, and obviously now he got his bond, so now it's an unconditional offer, so now you can put the first purchaser to terms. That's absolutely fine, but have a look at the clause. What does that clause say for the first purchaser? Sometimes it says that not only do you have to provide the first purchaser with a copy of that second offer, you must also provide proof that the suspensive conditions in that second offer has been complied with. So in that scenario, with a 72-hour clause that you'll send to your purchaser, you will send a copy of the offer to purchase. You'll send a copy of the bond approval, the final bond approval of the second purchaser. Or the clause might say, we want proof that the cash, if it's a cash deal, we want proof, you must send proof that the cash has been paid to the transferring attorney. Then you must send them a bank statement to show the cash has been paid. So whatever the 72-hour clause states or determines that needs to be done in order to put the first purchaser to terms has to be done with. And if any of those little things, maybe a copy of the offer to purchase, maybe if it's stated we need proof that maybe the bond approval, maybe if it says that that must be provided, that must be provided. And if any of those little things are not provided, if the contract says they must be provided, then notice wasn't given to the purchaser. Then after 3 days, when the second purchaser comes dancing in and says, hey, happy days, I'm carrying on, your first purchaser can say, hang on. You didn't provide me with the proof of the bond approval because the contract, the 72-hour clause says that you have to. Therefore, you have to, and you didn't give. So you can, Mama, give me notice again. Give me another 3 days notice. Provide me with the offer to purchase again and the proof that the bond has been approved. Oh, good. Okay. So it's important to follow the terms of the 72-hour clause. So that is, as I said, the importance of this talk to make sure that we understand what we need to do to give a proper 72-hour notice to a purchaser that you guys want to put to terms. Obviously, if the contract doesn't say that you must provide a copy of the offer to purchase to the first purchaser, or you must provide proof that the suspensive conditions have been, then you don't need to do that. And it's fine. There's no rule, there's no agreement that must be done, so you don't have to do it. No worries. But if it says that you must, then you must do it. Otherwise, proper notice wasn't given to the purchaser, and you'll have to give notice again, and then the period will start running again, the 3 days, just giving you, the first purchaser, more time to come up with the money or to get his bond approved, etc. So when does the clock start ticking? Again, you have to look at the 72-hour clause. When will it start to run? If it starts running when you've provided written notification to the first purchaser, you've provided him, if the contract says it, with a copy of the offer to purchase, with a copy of the bond approval, it will start to run as from the time that he was given written notice in terms of the 72-hour clause. So only once the second or third offer becomes unconditional as well, then the first purchaser will be put to terms in terms of the 72-hour clause. So offer to purchase, the second offer, whatever, will be unconditional, obviously, if the bond is approved for the second offer, or if the funds reflect in the attorney's trust account, if it's a cash deal. Then the funds or the guarantees must be in place, and then you can put the first purchaser to terms. And again, it starts ticking that 72-hour notice, starts ticking the minute that the notice is sent to the purchaser. And obviously, it will also depend on the wording of the clause. Is it business days? Is it calendar days? Are public holidays and weekends included or excluded? So it all depends on the wording of the 72-hour clause. If it doesn't say anything, it can be expected that it's calendar days. You've got 3 days from now. That is it. We don't care whether that notice period expires on a Sunday at 12 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever, at 1 o'clock. The contract doesn't specify that it excludes weekends and public holidays, so it can expire on a Sunday or a Saturday or a public holiday, depending on the wording of the 72-hour clause. So what could go wrong? Not properly defining the 72-hour clause, so not giving clear instructions whether weekend and public holidays are excluded. So that might cause, obviously, confusion with a purchaser, maybe. But I mean, if it doesn't state anything, then it's calendar days. If it doesn't say specifically that weekends and public holidays are excluded, then the time period might start on a Friday afternoon at 12, and then Saturday, Sunday, Monday at 12 o'clock the afternoon, the period would expire. Your purchaser might jump up and down and say, no, but hang on. I thought it was 3 business days or working days. Sorry, I thought I had until Wednesday to get the bond approved. I didn't know that the weekend was included and the banks are closed, the mortgage originator is on holiday in Langebaar, whatever. It's tough. The 72-hour clause didn't say that it excludes public holidays and weekends, so it doesn't then. Omitting to indicate that the subsequent sale, so that second offer to purchase, if you don't put in there that it is subject to the successful cancellation of the previous offer, the first offer, obviously you are going to have major headaches in your life. So let's say, for example, there's a first offer on the property, subject to bond approval, or whatever, a suspensive condition, subject to sale of whatever. So there's a first offer on the property, there's a subject to. Must be complied with by the 30th of September. There's a second offer that comes in, it's a cash offer. Cash. Now, great. We can put the first purchaser to terms, but in that second offer, it's important to put in there that it's subject to the cancellation of the first offer, because you first need to give notice to the first purchaser, the 72-hour notice, and if he doesn't comply, then that agreement is cancelled, and then the second offer will be applicable. If you don't put that in, subject to the cancellation of the first offer on the property. Let's say, for example, you now give notice to the purchaser on the first offer and say, hey, we've got a cash offer here. We now give you 72-hour notice. Here's everything that you need. We've complied with the 72-hour clause. You've got 3 days. And the first purchaser gets his bond approved, or the property is sold within those 3 days. You're going to have a problem, a big challenge, if your second offer was not subject to the cancellation of the first offer, because now you're going to have 2 purchasers on the same property. Purchaser number 2 is going to say, hey, here's my cash offer. It was accepted by the seller. He signed it. It was never subject to the cancellation of a first offer. So I want the property. Your first purchase is going to say, but I complied with the 72-hour clause. I got my bond approved. I want the property. So you can have two purchases that are entitled to the property, that sign the offer to purchase with the seller, and the seller will be between a rock and a hard place because he might be sued by one of these purchases for damages or whatever. So it's important to specify in the second offer that it is subject to the cancellation of the first offer to protect your seller and to protect yourselves as agents, not to be liable for any damages by anybody out there. So those are the hiccups or the stuff that can go wrong with the 72-hour clause. If you have a look, no indication that weekends and public holidays are excluded, then it's calendar days. Then, the time period will run over a Friday and a Saturday. The clock will be ticking, unfortunately, Mr. Purchaser, Mr. First Purchaser. So you must do what you need to do. So there's an example here of a 72-hour clause in an agreement. But it is very similar to your clause. It's in Afrikaans, so I don't want to read it in Afrikaans to you. It's very, very similar to your 72-hour clause, which just states that the agreement is subject to suspensive conditions. The seller may continue to market his property until such time as the purchaser has complied or fulfilled his suspensive conditions. If the seller receives another written bona fide offer to purchase his property that is not subject to any suspensive conditions, then the purchaser will be given 72-hour notice to waive or fulfill his suspensive conditions. And if he can't do it within those 3 days, then the seller will be entitled to cancel the agreement and to proceed with the second offer to purchase. Again, it didn't say anything about public holidays, weekends. So that is the whole point of this thing, which is very similar to your one. It doesn't say excluding public holidays or weekends, unless it says it in another clause. But anyway, in this specific Afrikaans one, it didn't say anything about public holidays or weekends. So the period ran, and it runs over weekends. It can run over public holidays. It doesn't matter. So in this specific scenario, so there was a second and a third sale, which was conditional upon the successful cancellation of the previous offers, the first offer, or etc., etc., etc. So there are additional clauses that are in the offer to purchases. So, for example, the second offer, let's say there's a second offer on the property. That second offer will be subject, this offer is subject to the successful cancellation of the sale agreement entered the first offer to purchase, entered into A and B. And let's say there's a third offer. The third offer will be, this offer is subject to the successful cancellation of the sale agreement entered into between A and C, the second offer, which was dated the 5th of November. The 72-hour clause will be implemented once the suspensive conditions in this sale agreement has been fulfilled. So it's always subject, whether there are 5 offers, it's always subject to the cancellation of the previous offer and offers on the offer to purchase, to protect your seller from purchasers that want to buy the property when they have complied with their suspensive conditions. So it becomes a bit tricky. So there was a scenario where there was a first offer received on a property between A and B. So A is the seller, B is the first purchaser over Earth in Strand. That was the first offer. the offer was signed on the 25th of October. There was then a second offer. We received a second offer to purchase on the property of the same property. That is now the second offer, so that's between A and C. The first offer is A and B, the second offer is A and C. A and C over the property, that was on the 3rd of November. And on the 12th of November, there was a third offer between A and D in respect of the same property. So all of these offer to purchases, A to B the first offer, A to C the second offer, A to D the third offer, they were all subject to bond approvals. So obviously, the guy who gets the bond first approved will go and run and put the other people to terms. So there were 3 offers, all subject to bonds. So up until Wednesday, the 18th of November at 10 to 8, all the offers listed, 1, 2, and 3, had conditions not yet met. As soon as we received notification of the bond approval of the third offer, so A to D, the last offer, so on the 18th of November, it was still subject to bond approvals. All the agreements had conditions. On that day, on the 18th of November, the third offer, A to C, received his bond approval. And therefore, we subsequently instituted the continued marketing clause at 12 o'clock on that Wednesday. And the clause would have lapsed on Monday, the 23rd, because in that scenario, it didn't exclude public holidays or weekends. So the time on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it did exclude Wednesday, so that's why it expired on the Monday. That's right. In that clause, it did have it. Okay. So notice was given on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the clause expired. Just want to have a look here on the Monday. Should the purchaser not meet the conditions and the bond approval was not obtained. Accordingly, the second in-line offer has come into play. So what happened in this scenario and what the courts have decided? Let's say, for example, in this scenario, the third offer, A to C, got his bond approved. What you have to do as a third purchaser, you have to give notice to the first purchaser to say, Mr. First Purchaser, we've now received an unconditional offer. On Wednesday, whatever date it was, 25th of October, whatever. No, it wasn't the 25th of October, but on the Wednesday, the third purchaser's bond was approved. What they had to do then is they had to put the first purchaser to terms to say we've got an unconditional offer to purchase the property, and then the first purchaser was put to terms. What they then had to do is the third purchaser, so the first contract was cancelled. The first offer to purchase, but the purchaser was cancelled because he couldn't comply with the terms and conditions. He couldn't get his bond approved, etc. So the first contract was cancelled. Then the third purchaser had to put the second purchaser to terms and give him 3 days to say, hey, Mr. Second Purchaser, yes, you are second in line. It's still subject to you getting your bond. So you are now given 3 days to get your bond. Otherwise, the seller will proceed with contract number 3. So you can't put all the purchases to terms at the same time. So purchaser number 1 and purchaser number 2 can't be placed to terms on the same time. You've got to purchaser number 3 first had to put purchaser number 1 to terms and cancel that agreement, and then put purchaser number 2 to terms, give him 3 days, and then cancel that agreement, because those clauses specifically state in clause number 2 and clause number 3 clearly says that this offer is subject to the successful cancellation of the sale agreement in the prior offer to purchase. And the 72-hour clause will only be implemented once the suspensive conditions have been complied with by the second purchaser, etc., etc., etc. So the clause says that it's subject to the successful cancellation of the agreement. So the courts have decided that You cannot enforce the 72-hour clause until such time as that contract has been cancelled. So you can't enforce the 72-hour clause against purchaser number 2 unless you've cancelled the first contract, because in purchases number 2, offer to purchase, it states that the 72-hour clause can be enforced on the successful cancellation of the first sale agreement. So that is why, Mr. Third Purchaser, what we're going to do and what we have to do is we have to give the first purchaser 3 days notice, and if he cannot comply with fulfill the suspensive conditions, we're going to cancel that first agreement. And only then can we put the second purchaser to terms, because now the term in the second purchaser's agreement, it's subject to the cancellation of the first offer. That has now taken place. So that agreement has now been cancelled. So that's why suspensive conditions, you must have a look. How many terms are there in the suspensive condition? It's the cancellation of the first offer and the fulfillment of your suspensive condition. So, Mr. Purchaser, you haven't fulfilled your bond approval yet. However, we've already complied with the first condition. We've already cancelled the first offer to purchase in terms of the third offer, cash offer to purchase. So that has been done. So now, because we've cancelled the first offer, it says here, subject to the successful cancellation of the first offer. So that has been done. And now you are put to 3 days terms. If your bond isn't approved, then your agreement will also be cancelled with the seller, and then the third contract can go ahead. In this specific scenario, so what happened was the first purchaser was put to terms by the third purchaser, the cash offer was put to terms, that agreement was cancelled because the purchaser couldn't get his bond approved, whatever. So that agreement was now cancelled. Then the third purchaser could put the second purchaser to terms to say, right, we now give you 3 days because we've already cancelled the first offer, that's been cancelled, but you've now got 3 days to get your bond approved, Mr. Purchaser. And in this specific scenario, what happened was the second purchaser got his bond approved within a day or two after receiving the 72-hour notice. So the second offer actually proceeded, despite the fact that there was a cash third offer on the table. You had to give notice to the purchasers as and how they go down the line. First to the first purchaser, then to the second purchaser, and then the third purchaser can proceed, because the offer to purchase says in the first and the second, and it would have said it in the third one as well, depending on how many there are. But anyway, first offer, 72-hour clause said it's subject to the cancellation of this offer, or in terms of the second offer, it's subject to the cancellation of the first offer and the fulfillment of the suspensive condition. So if the contract hasn't been cancelled by between the first purchaser and seller, you can't give the second purchaser notice. You must first cancel the agreement. So purchaser number 3 or 4 must go and cancel the agreement, and then purchaser number 3 or 4 or 5 must then give notice to number 2, then number 3, then number 4, because 4 or 3, it will say it's subject to the cancellation of the prior offer. And if the prior offer number 2 isn't cancelled, then we'll proceed if we get our bond. And the same will be said in number 3 and number 4. Number 4 will say it's subject to the cancellation of the prior offer, number 3. So you can't give everybody notice. The contract and the clauses says that the prior offer must be cancelled, and if you've complied with your suspensive conditions, then you can put into terms in terms of the 72-hour clause. So it gets tricky where there are 2 or 3 or 4 offer to purchases in respect of the same property. But the main thing about the talk today is just, all the clauses in offer to purchases vary from one to the next. They are not all exactly the same. The one might refer to 72-hour notice, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and public holidays. So you need to adjust the time frame for giving the 3 days notice if those dates are not included. You need to make sure that if the offer to purchase says that a copy of the competing offer must be provided to the purchaser. You must provide a copy thereof. If you didn't provide him with a copy, your notice is null and void. You must start the notice afresh and give him a copy of the offer to purchase. If the offer to purchase says you must provide proof that that second purchaser's bond has been approved, you must provide the proof thereof. Because if you don't do it, you didn't give proper notice to the first purchaser. So then you gave him no notice, and you'll have to start the notice all over again. Give him another 3 days and say, oh, quick, sorry, I forgot to give you the proof of the bond approval that I had to give. I must give you notice again. So the wording is very important. Read the wording, make sure that you know how you must give the notice. And very often, like that first example that I said, that 72-hour clause will not be applicable within the first 10 days after signing of the offer to purchase. Then it doesn't help you to give notice to the purchaser 5 days after the offer to purchase was signed. He's going to say, you can't give me notice. I don't care whether you've got a cash offer for 20 million on this property. You can't give me notice. So the wording of those clauses are extremely important. And notice must be given verbatim, as those clauses require you to give notice. Otherwise, the purchaser is going to laugh at you and say, no, I received your written notice, thank you. But it's not a valid notice because you didn't provide me with X, Y, or Z. So you know what? You can try again. Give me another 3 days notice, and then we'll see where I am after 3 days. So that's the importance of those lovely things. And that is the end of my story. Hello, Durbanville and Louwbergrand and Louwbergstrand and everybody. If you've got any questions, I'm obviously available here.
Thank you so much, Hein. That was very informative.
Absolute pleasure, Michelle.
Thank you always for your input. We really do appreciate it.
It's great.